Hello, I am NourbeSe Philip. I am a poet, writer, um, independent scholar, an embedded poet, as I often refer to myself. I live in Toronto and I hail from Trinidad and Tobago, in particular from Tobago, which is where I was born and my family on both sides comes from. Practiced law in Toronto for 7 years. Um, and in fact, I actually, with my partner at that point, we had the first all-woman black firm in, in the country. A woman called Martha Jemmett and myself. And then we had another woman, Susan Alves, who joined us a few years later. Um, I did family, immigration, and what was then called juvenile, um, the JD system, juvenile delinquents. Um, and in that context, you really saw how, young youth, black youth, were being targeted by the justice system. Um, as I said, we were the first all-female law firm. That has changed, which is really good because there are many more black lawyers now, many more black women lawyers, and so on. You asked about Zong. I think it was because I had studied law that I understood what was happening with Zong. So very quickly, Zong, there was a ship called Zong. I understand the name of the ship was originally Zorg, Z-O-R-G, which is Dutch for care. And it was being repainted in Ghana. And the R, as in Zorg, became N when it was repainted. The ship sets across the Atlantic with a cargo of some 470 enslaved Africans. And the journey is taking a lot longer than it's supposed to take because the captain is inexperienced and some people fall sick, crew and enslaved Africans, so they die, and the captain decides he's going to throw overboard in excess of 100 people because the way insurance law worked at that time, if he felt that if he did that, and he was right, if he did that, he could claim insurance for the very people that he murdered, except at that point it wasn't seen as murder because these people were seen as things. And so he does that. The ship gets to Jamaica, offloads the rest of the cargo, and then heads back to Liverpool. And in fact, the owners of the ship do make a claim against the insurance company for the people that they murdered. And the insurance company said, no, we're not going to pay you. So the ship's owners take it to court. And the court does say at the first trial, yes, you have to pay them because they were just mitigating their losses. They were just reducing the possibility of loss. So I'll just pause there because it was because I had studied law that I understood that the way the law works, it squeezes out all the lived experience of people's lives as it makes its way through the court system. And I really believe that the lives of those Africans on board that ship were locked in the archive, which was just a case report, 2 pages long, saying, we're going to grant them a new trial. Because what in fact happens, as I said, the first trial said, yes, you have to pay them. And the insurance company appealed it. And at the appeal, they were granted a new trial. But then that becomes, the whole case becomes a mechanism for the abolitionists to organize around and so on. I don't think a new trial was ever held. But the whole case comes into history You know, it's very well known, people who read slave histories and so on. And it has echoes, and more than echoes, very powerful echoes for us today as humans and as black-skinned people, how our lives are so disposable. They're still disposable. And last night at that reading, I read about that incident that happened to me on the bus in Morocco, where I was going to the desert with a bus full of people. I was the only black person, and they chose me to be the one who should get off the bus because two white people showed up late, and I was supposed to be the disposable person. I should get off the bus to have them get two seats. And so it just was an uncanny repetition of what had happened 300 years ago, you know, where black bodies become so disposable. In terms of belonging, yes, I write it, and particularly in that essay, be/longing, because there's a sense in which we be longing to belong somewhere. We be longing to belong somewhere. And of course, you smile because you realize I'm using a black vernacular speech. You know, we be happy, we be longing to belong somewhere. And, you know, there's a sense when I go back to Africa, I've been there a few times, that's when it always hits me, when I hear my cousins, whom I don't know, my brothers, my sisters, you know, in whatever country I've been in. I haven't been in many, South Africa, Swaziland, Ghana, Nigeria. When I hear them speaking their languages, and I realize just how deep the culture is, and how language is the entry point to so much, that's when it always hits me what it is they took from us, and why it is I have written what I've written, because it comes from this place of belonging to have a mother tongue again, a place where our mothers sort of licked us into life and into love and into truly belonging. As I talk, I can feel the tears but that's something we have to live with. But I do think that those of us who were taken out from Africa and created new places of be/longing in the Americas and the Caribbean, we've also fashioned something out of what was, you know, what was left to us. And it's something I feel very strongly about, because we didn't just jump overboard and die, as Killmonger says before he kills himself in Black Panther. No. Some of us made a choice to live, and because they made that choice to live, I am here today. Others like me are here today. So I have tremendous pride and love for what we've created here in the New World and the work that we have done. And that work is very important, because often when we look at ourselves vis-a-vis Africa, we see ourselves, I say ourselves, those of us who don't have an African language or African culture, don't come from the continent, we see ourselves as lacking, we see ourselves as a deficit when we confront our African brothers and sisters. And perhaps that is why Killmonger was represented as he was in Black Panther. But I think that we also have something of deep and powerful strength, you know, what we created here in the West. Because there's a sense in which we have been the spear, we're the tip of the spear against those systems of colonialism here in the West. I think that, you know, the thing that awes me about us is that resilience. And that, what is it? Is it what I talked about last night? This using the word silence to stand in for that which will not be broken. And not just will not be broken, but that which continues to create beauty in the face of systems that intend to break you. So just to take one example, think of the musics, you know, of the world that we have created, singing our loss, singing our belonging, that the world continues to absorb, take, use more times than not giving us credit for it. But we continue to create astonishing beauty. We continue to present models of humanity in the face of brutality. I pause because it does fill me with awe. What is it that we have this capacity to create? Last night I gave one example, the Gnawa in Morocco, taking the slaves to Morocco from sub-Saharan Africa. Today we have this upswing in racism in Morocco because a lot of sub-Saharan Africans are leaving to go to Europe. This is now almost a kind of self-propelled exodus from the continent, and many of them end up staying there. There's a great anti-black racism in Morocco. And you have these people who, over the years, created this music to sing of their loss, to sing of their pain. The wonderful jazz musician Randy Weston from the United States lived there for 10 years, brought them to the West, and so on. And I actually witnessed, there was a Gnawa festival in Morocco that I was at, and the night there were all these vendors that came from Senegal, Cameroon, and so on singing. And the night before they left, they were on the street singing for hours. And I thought to myself, this is how Gnawa got formed. They were singing, all the different groups, the vendors who were there, singing, playing music, and so on. I was in Brazil a couple of years ago. A society of black women called the Irmandade de Boa Morte, the Sisterhood of Good Death, formed in slavery to buy each other out of slavery and to create a refuge for people. Every year they celebrate this society, the Sisterhood of Good Death. The beauty in these Madres de Dios, they're called, the Mothers of God, because they are also involved in candomblé and various African spiritual practices. Just astonishing. And I think this is what I feel that we have to convey to our young people. And I'm so happy to be talking to someone like yourself who is continuing the work that we have always done. One of the things that I say, you know, we talk about reparations. Reparations is not simply giving money to individuals. You know, you hear people saying, oh, what, are you going to give Oprah money? No. What reparations are about is if you understand what was broken. I talked to you about going to Africa and hearing the languages. What about if there were a fund that every young person, young black person who is descended from the Ma'afa, that's the word I use to talk about that transatlantic journey, that journey that was intended to break us. The Ma'afa, a Swahili word meaning a terrible happening. What if every young person, young black person who, say, wanted to learn an African language could access a fund that would allow them to reconnect with an African language? What if a young or black person wants to find out, you know, there's all this DNA testing now that people have to pay for. What if there were a fund, let's say every descendant of the Ma'afa were given, you say you could access $500 to get DNA testing. So at least you could find out, well, you know, some of my ancestors came from Nigeria, what is now Nigeria. I've done it, but I've had to pay for it. I know that I have ancestors that come from Sudan, some come from Nigeria, some come from the Bamileke and so on. You know, so what I'm saying is that those are the ways, those are other ways in which we can repair, which is also in the word reparations, what has been broken. What if there were a fund that gave young people the chance to go and live in Africa for say a year, to return, to make connections, because it's through those connections that we're going to have, you know, this re-establishment of the links between the, what I call the Afrospora and the continent. I'm looking at my future right now. I'm looking at you. And no, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And some of the another young woman I met last night, Nini, do you know, I am just so, you have no idea how honored it brings tears to my eyes when I see young women like you and Nene who are picking up that torch and carrying it forward. It's a very different future in the sense that, you know, there's this digital technology that's there around us, and how are we going to use that, you know? And as we were talking before, I don't think, you know, when I think of the people who are creating these technologies, there aren't many Black people who are working in Silicon Valley. And I'm just thinking it's astonishing how those wisdoms, you know, I think there are a few more Asians, but mainly it's white, European ancestor people who are creating these technologies. And to me, that means that they're going to be missing the wisdoms that other groups can bring to this. There aren't many indigenous people either. What does that mean for the technologies? It means the technologies are going to reflect what is of importance to them. So I think it's interesting to come back to Black Panther, that what does Wakanda have? Wakanda has super developed technology, which is what this culture values. So, I mean, we only know what we know, right? And that capacity to think outside the box, which I think we have, all humans have it. But then sometimes we get so managed that we're not able to think outside of what it is we've been schooled into thinking. I don't know, what might be an alternative to that super technology that might be of value to us? Is it just fast cars and that sort of thing? I don't know. But do you see what I'm getting at? Or even take something like capitalism. You know, is this the best humans can come up with? This practice that, yes, creates a lot of energy and people are working for themselves, but it's a practice that has devastated the world, not to mention cultures and people and so on. Is this the best we're capable of? How can we begin to think outside the box and begin to create ways that are going to really heal us and help us to live on this? Right now, we think we're the only one. We don't know if there's any life out there, but this planet that is really being devastated by practices that we live the results of. We carry it in our bodies. Do you know? So the future is you. And you know, it really made me, last night when people came up to me and said, I'm thinking again of Nene, that, you know, my writing has made a difference to her. I think, you know, maybe it was worth it then. Not maybe, it was worth it, because I left the practice of law to write. And I have sometimes I question, you know, myself. But I think that maybe I am just part of that long tradition of resisting and speaking to another truth that we know in our bodies is there. You know, in one essay I have, I talk about when I write, I have two people over my shoulders. I wrote this about 25 years ago. There's Abiswa, I don't know where the name came from, and there's John from Sussex. You know, and there's always this kind of fight going on, because I can't pretend that I wasn't, I didn't come out of a colony, you know, went to a school that was British in terms of how it was set up and so on. But there's Abiswa, this little old lady who is there, who sometimes is laughing, you know, but who keeps kind of pulling at me and nagging at me, you know, to do what has to be done. So the performance I did last night, where does that come from? I say I don't know, because, you know, we have been made stranger to these practices. I grew up believing that Obia was something, you know, it was witchcraft and all that stuff. You know, African spiritual practices have been demonized outside of the continent and even within the continent. I don't pretend to know a lot about them. I've read a lot, but I think part of what Zong is working with is trying to say, look, some of these practices, like honoring our ancestors and so on, open up paths for us to heal ourselves. Somebody said to me last night, that must be very hard for you to do, and it must leave you really exhausted. And yes, it's difficult. It's difficult partly because it's so different from legal training and this colonized training I have in that sense, and I'm always worried, you know, particularly when I do it in academic spaces, like I go into universities. That's when it really makes it difficult. Last night I felt connected almost immediately, maybe because it was this gallery space. But yes, it's difficult, but no, it leaves me feeling like somebody, something, some entity, some force has given me back something that I can take for the next day and the next day and the next day. And I think of my sisters on the continent. You said something to me last night, I'm not going to repeat it, but I think you'll know what I'm referring to. You know, I had somebody say to me years ago, aren't you glad you were brought out of the continent? That's the flip side of what you told me. And sometimes when I think of my sisters and brothers and children on the continent and what they're going through, you know, I have to face the fact that, yeah, I am Black, but I'm also living this privileged life here, do you know? And that's what I mean by saying we're all contaminated by this system. And how can we bridge these really incredible, awful, hallucinatory gaps, you know, that the system has created for us. So I have to, and that's what Zong does for me. It keeps reminding me of that we have to come to a place where my being and your being is sufficient. It shouldn't be contingent on whether I'm a Black person, a white person, a Muslim, a Christian, you know, whatever. On that note, I think I'll end. Thank you.